It's time to talk about the underdogs for Lyrical Monasterio, as we are entering part 3 of Lyrical Monasterio set review. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another part of the Lyrical Monasterio set review. We already talked about the generic stuff in part 1, we talked about Rosa as well as Kyrie in part 2, and in this time we're gonna tackle the two underdog ride lines of the nation, as we're going to tackle Willista as well as Alestiel. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into these cards, and we're gonna start off with the gem girl herself, Willista, as the first ride line and support cards we're tackling this video. So first off, we're gonna start off with the ride line itself, which is going to be the grade 1, of course, because we already tackled the starters in part 1. So here we have the grade 1 Willista, proof of effort Willista, and her effects are: although when a unit is rode upon, cost, put a card from your hand into the soul, search a deck for up to one gem card, reveal it, put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this is effectively a searcher for a specific card, which is great because we typically see these +1 skills on the ride line for grade 1s, but this is effectively better because you now know what you're gonna get, which then also filters for triggers. And in this case you can search either the ruby or sapphire, which is great because you need both of them to actually make your engine work. So having a consistency card like this is actually pretty decent. But on top of it, it also allows it to be splashable in other decks, because you can just run this grade 1 with a couple of gems and you will always be able to search out those gems for other ride lines, which is actually not that bad. And then on top of that, she also has the skill Auto Record Circle. When you play an order, cost Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets power plus 5 until the end of turn. This is alright, but as seen as this particular ride line already is going to use Soul quite heavily, I'm not so sure if you have the room to actually pay for this cost. Overall, this is going to be a solid 3-star card. Maybe you could say 4-star card because she can be splashed in other decks, and it also means that the gems as an engine can be used in other archetypes, but I'm not so sure if it's actually that good enough right now to make actually something of it. But who knows, maybe in the future it can actually become better. Then if we move up to the grade 2, we've got Expanding World Willista, which has the skill Auto Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, when you play a gem card, draw a card. This is actually really nice because gems are orders, which means they are inherently a minus, and this skill means you can negate that minus, which is great, but it also means that it's super reliant on the grade 1. Now luckily you always will have the gem because of the grade 1, but it means you cannot really get away with running another grade 1 from another ride line, because if you don't have the gem card in your hand in the early game, this skill is basically wasted. So it's alright, but it's not bound breaking or anything. And then she also has a skill which is actually pretty decent, which is Continuous on Guardian Circle. This unit gets shield plus 5k for every 2 gem cards in your drop. As seen as gems are order cards, now they usually go to the drop, but in their case they go to the soul, but they will get soul blasted at some point. So you could actually use this skill to become a pretty beefy shield unit, because it's not that hard to see this card being a 10k shield, and potentially even more than that, as there are 2 gem cards, which means there are a total of 8 copies, so there's a potential of getting 20k extra shield. Now that is very far-fetched. Probably 10 will be more likely, but overall that means we have a beefy shield unit in the deck, which is nice to have. Overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Nothing really more than that though. Now if we move up to the main grade 3, the boss unit herself, we got Prismagica Willista, which has the skill Auto Vanguard Circle, cost Soul Blast 1 True Hearted Ruby. Until the end of turn, this unit gets power plus 15k and your opponent cannot intercept. So this is actually pretty nice, because it means for 1 Soul Blast you get plus 15k power. You need to Soul Blast a specific card which puts itself into the soul, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue, but overall not that bad. But then she also has a secondary effect, which is Auto Vanguard Circle, cost Soul Blast 1 Everlasting Sapphire. Look at the 5 cards from the top of your deck, choose up to 2 unit cards from among them, call them to an open rearguard circle, discard the rest, and those units gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Overall, it can be an interesting effect because it is a plus engine to some extent, but milling the rest can be quite harsh, especially if in the top 5 most of them are triggers or something like that, which kind of sucks in those instances. It's a Eugene type of RNG effect, but it's definitely a lot less cheaper than Eugene himself, and the other skill, being able to give yourself 15k power, is actually pretty decent. Now the great thing is that none of these skills are once per turn, so if you have multiple of the rubies, you could get the Vanguard quite like a significant power buff, and if you have no units at all, you could use the Sapphire skill twice to build an entire board. You do lose 10 cards from your deck, so you should be wary about that, but overall, as a boss unit, this card feels kind of underwhelming because it doesn't really push anything, and big power on a unit is great and all, but if there's nothing really behind it, then it's just all for show, but no substance. So for me, Willista feels like a 3-star boss unit because it does have an engine here, but there's no real big payout. At least it's not that showable on the boss unit itself. Now, of course, we got a couple support cards, and we also need to talk about the gems themselves. So let's take a look at them, and hopefully the value will be in them, or Willista, as probably the reason why it's an underdog deck, will stay at this kind of mediocre status that it is right now. So first off, we've got True Hearted Ruby, one of the gems, and this gem has the effect: play this with cost, count up as 1, draw 2 cards, choose a card from your hand and discard it. Put this card into your soul. So it's, on first glance, it looks pretty good because it draws 2 cards, but it's not actually a plus at all, because you lose a card in hand for playing this order card. Then you pay a count plus, which should be equal to 2 cards, and then you draw 2 cards, but then immediately one of those cards needs to be discarded. So you actually go -1 from activating the skill, but you did draw 2 cards from your deck. So you're gonna go through your deck quite fast. Luckily though, at least this card goes to the soul, so it's not completely a minus, as the minus goes towards the soul to some extent, which not only works towards your Willista effect, because now you have the ruby in your soul, but at the same time you also build up soul, which then can be used for any other generic soul blasting skill. So there is definitely some utility to it, and the fact that you draw into a couple of cards before you're gonna discard them makes it also a pretty decent cycle effect. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card that can be used as a draw engine to just search for your pieces in whatever other deck you potentially want to splash this. As you can just run the grade 1 of the rideline, use the grade 1 to fetch the 1 copy of Ruby in your deck, and just use this in the early game to just draw into more cards as fast as possible. Now as for the other gem, we've got Everlasting Sapphire, which has a skill: choose one of your units, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn, put this card into your soul. So for discarding 1 card, you get 5k and you get a soul. Overall, this is not too great. I personally will only give it 2 stars because it's this card for 5k and a soul. It's just not great as a value. The only upside to this is that it builds up soul, which can help other decks, and it builds up the correct soul for your Willista to potentially call down an entire board. So there is more inherent value because you can then use Willista's effect, but the value within this particular gem itself is pretty mediocre. Now moving on to the actual supporting units, we've got this grade 1, Quiet Love Elevira, and Elevira has the effect: auto Rigor Circle. When you play Everlasting Sapphire, if your Vanguard is Prismagica Willista, draw a card. So this is kind of interesting because this means whenever you play the Sapphire, you get a 3+ out of it. That makes actually the order pretty decent because now the orders aren't a minus anymore because you immediately draw. But the problem is that you're then reliant on this grade 1 to actually get that. So this grade 1 is actually then vanilla in that instance because it's still reliant on the gem to actually generate the value. And as seen as it's an order card, you can only use it once per turn, so there's a limiting factor here. Now, that said, we are aware that there is a grade 3 that allows us to play multiple orders in a turn, so that can be a thing. But overall, it's a bit iffy. Now, honestly, I would only give this card 2 stars because it's very restrictive. It can only work in a very specific scenario, and if that scenario doesn't come up, it's just vanilla. Now, as soon as we got the support card for the Sapphire, that means we also have a support card for the Ruby, and in this case, we got that for, in this grade 3, Leveling Watching Over Otiri. And Otiri has the effect: auto Rigor Circle. When you play True Hearted Ruby, if your Vanguard is Prismatica Willista, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn, and you may play an additional order this turn. Yeah, this is a 4-star card because this is definitely a card the engine needs. Because it revolves around 2 orders, being in the soul, so that probably tells us that we want to play 2 orders every single turn to fuel Willista every single turn. Now, this card single-handedly allows us to do that. Because if we play the Ruby, we can play another order card, which then probably will be the Sapphire or maybe another Ruby. And then it not only will it give this card 10k power, but it allows us to fuel our entire engine. And since the Ruby draws more cards, it also allows us to potentially draw into the Sapphire that we're going to need. And interesting enough, this skill is once again not once per turn. So if we play multiple Rubies back to back, that can actually be a thing, because every time we play a Ruby, her skill activates, she gets 10k power, and we can play another order, so we can keep going as long as we have to counterblast to pay for the Rubies. So this is actually a pretty good card, and it actually works really nicely for the Willista deck, as it also puts more power on the board. Now, beyond that grade 3, we also have a grade 2, which is Recorded Feelings Romana, and Romana has the effect: continuous Rigor Circle. If you play True Hearted Ruby and Everlasting Sapphire this turn, this unit gets power plus 10k. This is going to be a 2-star. If this was was just play one or the other and you get the 10k power, this actually would be a pretty decent 3-star card. But the fact that you need to play both the gems in one turn to actually get the power, it's kind of annoying because you're not always going to play both gems in a single turn, because that means you're also going to be reliant on having the grade 3 we just talked about or the other grade 3 that we talked about in part 1. Which means it's very restrictive. So yeah, this is again a 2-star card. The value is fine, but the conditions are super annoying. Now luckily we also have some consistency cards in the likes of this grade 1, Mini Life After School Katina. And Katina has the effect, although when a unit is placed in a rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast 1 and discard a card from your hand. Choose a gem card from your drop and put it into your hand. So this allows us to get those gems back into the hand if we're running out, and that means we have more fuel for our engine, which is great. Now interesting enough, if you need to place this card on the field and you have no gems in the drop and you don't want to lose out on the value of the skill, you could just Soul Blast the gem from the soul, which then allows you to get it back to your hand. So those are also options you have as soon as the gems goes towards the soul. So Katina, pretty flexible card. It opens up more value and consistency wise, so it's gonna be a solid 3-star card for me. Now we also have a similar card in the likes of a grade 2, which is Mystic Voice Renate. And Renate has the effect, although when the unit is placed in a rearguard circle, choose up to 2 gem cards with the same card names from your drop, put a card from among them on the bottom of your deck, and put the rest into your soul. So instead of the grade 1 that allows you to potentially play it again from hand, this immediately puts it into the soul to just keep going. This honestly is really good in combination with Ruby, because what you can do is if you have 2 rubies in your soul, you can blast them both out, give your Willista plus 30k power, call this grade 2, put one of the ruby back to the deck, put the other ruby back into the soul, and then soul blast the ruby again with Willista to give your Vanguard another 15k power, thus having a plus 45k Willista, which then will swing for 58k. That's actually pretty good. So yeah, this card is actually pretty decent. It opens up more consistency and it puts a card back to the deck, which is important because you're gonna draw a lot of cards, so you don't want to go deck out all too often. So Renate helps you at least with that aspect as well. So it's gonna be a 3-star card for me. I think this is gonna be a solid card, maybe a tech choice, maybe even a staple for the Willista version. Who knows? Now, with the Gem and Willista ride line discussed, let's take a look at the black and white wing variant with Alestiel. And I'm going to start off with the grade 1 of the ride line, which is Indecisive Sky Alestiel. And Alestiel has the effect, although when the unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, bind the top card of your deck. So this is how the archetype is going to work. You're going to put a card in your bind zone, and depending on the grade of those cards, you're going to get either white wings or black wings. If the grade of the cards in your bind zone are only uneven, you're going to get white wings. If they're all only even, which includes triggers because 0 is an even number, then you're going to get black wings. The important thing is that they all need to be of the same type. So if you have an even and an uneven, no skills will activate. They all need to be even, they all need to be uneven to get this skill. Now luckily, as you're going to see with the ride line, as those are the only cards that actively can put cards in your bind zone, you can only have one card in your bind zone at most at the time, which makes it very hard to not fulfill either one of the conditions. So what do we get for white wings for this grade 1? White wings continues the Vanguard circle. When you would ride from your ride deck, you may soul this 1 instead of choosing card from your hand and discard it. So basically, you get a plus by soul blasting. That's not that bad. So if you hit a grade 1 or a grade 3, you can just soul blast instead of discarding for next turn. Overall, it's fine. It's not the greatest of value because it's not actually a plus because you still need to waste a resource. But it's alright. And then if we hit a grade 2 or grade 0, we get black wings, and it's continues on Vanguard circle. All of your opponent's grade 1 or less rearguards cannot attack this unit. This is great if you went first, because that means your opponent cannot actually rush you if they ride to grade 1 after you. But if you went second, this is a different story, because the moment they can attack, they're gonna ride up to grade 2 and they can just call grade 2. So yeah, for me, this is going to be a 2-star card because the White Wings variant is a weaker +1 that we've seen with other cards. And the Black Wings variant is a 50-50 in a good term, but it's a 50-50. You already have a 50-50 in getting White Wings or Black Wings. And then in the Black Wings is again a 50-50 if you won the dice roll or not. So yeah, it's gonna be a 2-star for me. Now, if we move up to the grade 2, we've got Shining As Is Alestio, and this has the effect, although when the unit's placed in the Vanguard circle, choose a card from your bind zone, put it on the bottom of your deck, and And if you put a card, put the top card of your deck face up. So the grade 1 already puts something in the bind zone. Then next turn, this card just puts it back on the bottom of your deck and you bind another card from the top of your deck. This is how basically the engine keeps itself going. Then for white wings, when we have something uneven, we get act on Vanguard circle once a turn, cost counter +1, and this unit gets critical +1 until the end of the turn. This is fine. This basically gives your Vanguard extra crit pressure, so your opponent is basically forced to guard your Vanguard attack, as that means they either gonna risk taking a lot of damage very early on, so you're gonna rip out more shield from their hand. And if they don't have a trigger, they might have to make a gamble and just want to pass it, or waste a lot of cards in the early game, which can be very positive for your game stance. Now, if you get something even, we got Black Wings, which get the skill Continuous Vanguard Circle. During the battle this unit attacked, your opponent cannot call trigger units from their hand to the Guardian Circle. So this is also great, because that basically means that they cannot really actively guard your Vanguard attack very effectively, because that means you can only guard with 5Ks. I mean, in some instances, maybe 10Ks, but that means it's still someone to pass, and that then also means that they either need to waste more shield value or just take the attack, which is probably most likely going to happen here. So overall, this card is just here to put more pressure, and therefore it's going to be a solid 3-star card for me. Now, you might think to yourself, now hold up, this doesn't really give you a lot of value. The main value within this card is that there is actually an interesting play you can do, where it is possible to get both white wings and black wings in the same turn. But you will understand that the moment we're gonna talk about the support cards. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that to get the critical, you only need to be in the main phase in white wings. After that, you want to be in black wings for the battle phase. If you can manage to create that scenario, you could swing with a double critical and your opponent cannot guard with triggers, which is very dangerous, especially if you call a booster behind her. But the main spectacle comes from the main grade 3, so if we move up to grade 3, we see Archangel of Twin Wings, Alestiel, and this Alestio has the skill on Vanguard Circle. At the beginning of your main phase, choose a card from your bind zone, put it into your hand, and if you put a card, bind the top card of your deck face up. So now, instead of shuffling it back to the deck, you're gonna get a free plus every single turn. So that's actually pretty decent, because a free plus for nothing shouldn't be underestimated. Sure, your opponent knows what you're gonna get to your hand, but if you immediately use it onto the board, if it's an offensive card, who cares? So that's actually pretty decent. But now we're gonna get into the Black Wings, White Wings shenanigans. So for White Wings, when we get something uneven, we get Continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, this unit gets power plus 5k and critical plus 1. So now we're gonna swing with an 18k double critical Vanguard that always pluses every single turn, potentially. That's not that bad, because that means your opponent is forced to block your Vanguard attack every single turn, because they cannot really take the luxury to just no-guard your Vanguard attack even on the very first grade 3 turn, because if you rip a crit, that could almost immediately end the game right there on the spot. So that's actually not that bad. But then we also have Black Wings when we get something even, and that's Continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, all of your opponent's units get power minus 5k. So this effectively means that all your rear guards most likely are going to hit into your opponent's Vanguard, even if they're just unboosted units, as any 13k becomes 8k, so that's low enough to just being hit by anything, which is pretty good. But in the early game, if you went first, your opponent is at a 10k base, so they go back to 5, so that means if you start swinging with 10k units or maybe 20k units, that's really hard to guard. So overall, this can be very nasty, and since it also hits into your opponent's rear guards, this could also generate a scenario where you're gonna get some free pups as well. But you will understand at the moment that we're going to see the rest of the support cards. Overall, for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card. This card generates just free value turn after turn. So although as a boss unit, it doesn't have any flashy skills that allows you to generate gigantic powers or multi-attacks or whatever, or just field nukes or anything like that. This is just resources. You're going to build up resources turn after turn after turn, and then your rear guard's going to build up your board and actually allow you to pressure your opponent and just win the game through that. Which is honestly, if it works, it's good enough. But to truly understand that, let's take a look at the support cards, and we're going to split it up into 3 segments. First, we're going to take a look at all the White Wing support, then we're going to take a look at all the Black Wing support, and then we have 2 more cards to discuss, which are basically multi-wing support, just like what Alestio herself is, as she is both Black Wings and White Wings. So first off, let's take a look at the White Wings, and we got this grade 1, which is Lively Motion That Shakes the Skies, Maribel. And Maribel has the skill White Wings, Continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, this unit gets power plus 10k. So this is a 15k booster or attacker. Honestly, not that bad. I think it's a solid 3-star card. Now, one thing I want to keep in mind is that, yes, it's a White Wing skill, And the other cards we're going to talk about are Blackwing skill, so you can say it's a 50-50 chance of actually getting the skill. But you can build your deck in a certain way that you can almost 100% guarantee the value out of these cards. So you can take that with a grain of salt in how much you value the fact that it's the White Wings and the Black Wings condition is restricted to them, but I like to overlook them to some extent because you're probably going to build the deck in a certain way that you're going to guarantee the value out of these cards. Now, if we move up to another great one, we've got Little Piece Parel, and Parel has the skill White Wings, continues on Rearguard Circle and Guardian Circle. This unit gets power plus 2k and shield plus 5. So the other one was a 15k attacker and booster. This is a 10k attacker booster, but also 10k shield. So it's basically a 10k 10k. That's honestly not that bad. I think it's just bigger beat sticks and bigger numbers, and it's seen as the White Wings is all about uneven, so you're gonna play grade 3s and grade 1s. Having a 10k booster actually matters because you're gonna attack with 13k grade 3s, so they then become 23k columns. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card that makes sense in the deck that is going to be used and how you're going to build it. Now, another great one that we've got is Sharing Happiness, Daniel. And Daniel has the skill White Wings, auto on Rearguard Circle. When this unit boosts, cost Soul Blast 2, choose one of your other units and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn for each of your other units with odd grades. So effectively what this card can do is if you have a full board with uneven cards, you can Soul Blast 2 and give one other unit potentially 25k power, because it doesn't look at itself, but it counts the rest. And it seems your Vanguard is also grade 3 uneven, it actually works. So plus 25k power to a unit for 2 Soul Blast. It's fine, but it's not the greatest value, and the scene she is in 7k booster doesn't really make any good magic numbers, except if you went first, because 13 plus 7 is 20. But overall, it's gonna be a 2-star card for me. Like, I wish this wasn't a 2 Soul Blast, or at the very least, maybe spread the power to more units, maybe to 2 units that you can give them, but that's sadly not the case. Now, a grade 1 that's actually gonna matter a lot, and is probably one of the main pushing powers behind the Alestiel deck, is Wings with Rainbow Glow, Arumael. And Arumael has the skill White Wings, auto. When this unit is placed on the Rearguard Circle, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, cost Counter Blast 1, choose one of your Rearguards for every 3 of your units with odd grades, and it gets power plus 5k and critical plus 1 until the end of turn. So, again, what this card wants you to do is have a full board of uneven units, then you can Counter Blast 1 to give 2 units plus 5k and a critical. That's actually pretty good, because keep in mind, we also have the White Wing skill of Alestiel, which also gives itself 5k and a critical. So with this grade 1, effectively all your attacks gonna swing with extra power and a double critical, which means your opponent cannot really effectively no-guard any of your attacks, which is kind of devastating, as this is similar to just giving all your units force 2. So for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card. Now, the only problem that I have with this card is that your opponent needs to be grade 3, so it's a little bit slower, and you need to have a full board to actually gain the value of this card. You can get away with just getting 1 critical, but honestly, you much rather want to have that all your attacks are going to swing with double critical, so your opponent has no luxury in taking any attack, as that means that even if they're at 4 damage, they're in lethal range. Now, as I said before, we're going to rely on grade 3s, so we're going to have 13k attackers. Now, that is going to be a bit contradicted by this card, as we got Brainy Prayer Bibuel, as seen as she's an 8k base. But there's a way to fix this. But first off, we got act on Rearguard Circle, cost Soul Blast 1 and retire this unit, draw a card, choose up to 1 trigger unit from your bind zone, and it gets grade plus 1 until the end of turn. This is probably one of the most important cards within the White Wing variant, because as I already stated, you can go either White Wings or Black Wings, but the problem is you will always need to run triggers, and triggers are even cards, so they're gonna fuel Black Wings. And if we're gonna focus on White Wings, we don't want to bind triggers. So how can we fix that? We can fix it with this card. We can use this card to turn those triggers into grade 1s in our bind zone, so now suddenly White Wing skills are active once again. But in the case that we don't need to rely on the skill, it also has another effect, which is White Wings continues our Rearguard Circle, Guardian Circle. This unit gets power plus 5k and shield plus 5k. So once again, it's back to 13k, so it still makes the same magic numbers, but it's also a 5k shield from hand, so we get even more shield value. So together with the other grade 1, which also gains an extra shield value, we're going to see actually quite a decent amount of shield power within this archetype. So Overall, Bibarel to me is a solid 4-star card. Like, it's a very important card to have because you need to be able to consistently get to your white wing condition, because if you can't, that means at certain turns your entire engine is shut down, and that's not something you want to see. Now, moving up to another grade 1, which is actually really interesting, we've got Cloudless Heart Miael, and Miael has the skill White Wings Auto, 1 is units placed on the rearguard circle, cost Counter plus 1, and Soul Blast 1. Choose a power 8k card from your drop and put it into your hand. This is great because we got a couple of 8k grade 1s which are just generic good value. We got the one that can become a 10k booster or 10k shield, which is great. But I think the most important cards that we can discuss is the grade 1 that gives crit to everything with the unplace effect, thus allowing us to get more value of the unplace effect. And the grade 3 we just talked about, which can turn any trigger into white wings, which allows us to be more consistent in our white wings engine. Now the only issue that I have with that condition or that interaction is that in order to get that grade 3 back to your hand, you need to be already in white wings. So if you don't have one in hand and you have this card, but there's a trigger in your bind zone, you're stuck. So you need to be careful when using the grade 3 to actually getting your stuff, and then if you can, immediately combo it off with this grade 1 to get that grade 3 back into your hand before next turn if things go bad again. So yeah, this is pretty good. It's gonna be a solid 3-star card. There are some nitty little issues here, but overall it's pretty good. And that is also the last White Wing support card that we got. So let's take a look at what Black Wings can offer. And it's an interesting bunch of support cards. Because first off, we've got this grade 2, Staring at Love, Tirasuel. And Tirasuel has the effect Black Wings, auto, 1 is unit is put on the Guardian Circle. Choose one of your opponent's back row rearguards and rest it. Now the interesting thing, it states put, so intercept should work as well, but the thing is, because you rest a booster, that can almost be equivalent to 10k shield or 10k power that you're going to eliminate from an attack, if the booster isn't even stronger than that. So this could be way more than just 5k shield. But in certain scenarios, this could generate even more value. One of the more important things this card can do is potentially negate on-hit effects, like think of Tencha's stat for example, or it can screw over Magnolia by just removing an attack in its entirety. If there is a Gnosla in the back row, you can just rest the Gnosla preemptively, and they cannot even use the Gnosla that turn, which means you're gonna negate a lot of power that turn. So Tirasuel has actually a lot of applications built into this card that might not be as apparent on the surface, but this card is actually pretty nasty when used correctly. So overall, I think it's a solid 3-star card that opens up definitely different playstyles and different defensive options. That could actually matter depending on where the meta is shifting towards. So it's not going to be a go-to button for every scenario, but pretty decent in some. Next up, we've got yet another grade 2, and most of them are going to be grade 2s, of course, because Black Wings. And that next grade 2 is Flying Away Chaluel, and Chaluel has the effect Black Wings auto rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, cost counter plus 1, Soul Charge 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, and that unit cannot stand during the next stand phase. So we got more stunning here, only in this case it's actually Heart stuns a card, which is actually pretty interesting. Now this is once again a way that you can negate attacks. Of course, your opponent can just call over it, but depending on what type of unit it is, it can actually be very nasty. Like, for example, if you're up against Nirvana and they have a Valiente on the board, just putting this on the Valiente can basically shut down a lot of resource, because if they want to remove the Valiente, they first need to call something on top of it, which will cost a lot of cards because it's a Valiente. And if it isn't the Trickster they're calling on top of it, they need to discard even more cards to get the Trickster back onto the field. So depending on the scenario, but depending on your matchup and whatnot, this can be a lot of value. Now, Counterblast is heavy, but you do get the soul back, which then can be used for other skills. Now, next up we got another grade 2, which is probably my favorite of the grade 2s in the Blackwing archetype, as we've got Advent Stroke CDL. And CDL has the effect act on rearguard circle, cost Counterblast 1, and put this unit into your soul. Draw a card, choose up to 1 card from your bind zone, and it's get grade plus 1 until the end of turn. This is pretty good, because Counterblast 1, and you can change the grade. Of course, you put this card into soul, but you draw a card, so that's effectively a cycle. So it's a cycle that allows you to change the grades in your bind zone. That in itself might not sound all too big, but the fact that it isn't a Black Wings restrictive skill, this means that if you for some reason are playing grade 1s and grade 3s, of course you're going to play a couple of grade 3s because of Persona Ride, then this card allows you to go back into Black Wings, which is really good. But if you paid attention, I talked about with Alestiel, where you can potentially get both effects on your turn 2 Alestiel. And this is the card that enables it, because if you hit white wings, you can counterblast the 1, get the critical, and then you can use this effect to go into black wings and then swing with the guard restrict while you still have the critical because you already paid the cost for the white wings skill. That's actually really nice, because that's the only thing that you need to do in order to get this stage is be lucky on the 50-50 that you get an uneven card in your bind zone and then have this grade 2 in your hand. That's all you need. And you can even run this card in a white wings deck just for this skill alone, as that's actually pretty decent. You don't have to rely on the black wings skill. But this card also has a black wing skill, which is black wings continues or rearguard circle. This unit cannot be chosen by your opponent's effects and cannot be attacked by your opponent's rearguards. This is a hard card to remove. The only way that you can remove this card from the field is by an indiscriminate retire effect or bounce effect or whatever that allows you to remove all the cards on the board, or an entire column that just doesn't target. Overall, this thing is going to stick on the board. You can just use it for aggressive rushes, and then once you need to use her act ability, you can do it. So yeah, for me, this is going to be a solid 4-star card. It's once again probably one of those staple-like cards for the Alestiel deck, because it either works really nicely for white wings or even black wings just for the pure consistency aspect. Next up, we've got another grade 2, which is heavily recital Amanel, and Amanel has the effect black wings, auto rearguard circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked. While boosted, choose a card from your soul or rearguards, and you may return it to your hand. If you chose from soul, you put this unit into your soul. So this is similar to the other one that we got for white wings, which allows us to bounce back card from the drop zone. In this case, it allows us to get from the soul or from the field for just pure consistency's sake. Now this is similar, that it's synergized very nicely with the grade 2 that allows us to fix our bind zone, because that card goes towards the soul, which means this card can grab it from the soul, which is great. But just like the white wings variant, you need to do this preemptively, because this card has the black wings condition. So if you don't have the black wings condition, you cannot use the skill to get access to the grade 2 that can fix you to go back into black wings. So you have the same problem here as well. But overall, it's once again a card that allows us to reuse cards if they're on the field with their own place effects, or they move to the soul and we want to get them back again, because we already saw that a couple of cards soul charge or put themselves into soul, which this card allows you to fetch then once again. So overall, it's a solid 3-star card. It does its job, and it's a nice extra tool to your disposal. Now next up, we got another grade 2, which is Howling Ballet Vanel, and Vanel has the skill black wings, auto rearguard circle. When this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, soul charge 1, and this unit gets boost until the end of turn. So this is going to be very good for the black wings deck, because as we already explained, you're going to rely on a lot of grade 2s. If not all your units are going to be grade 2s, which means you lack boosters. This is a booster, also generates soul, so it's honestly not that bad. It actually works pretty well. So yeah, it's going to be a solid 3-star card. The only issue that I have with this card is that it's unplaced and not just active of the entirety of the game, but we have the other grade 2 that can potentially get this card back to our hand. Now for the final Blackwing support card, we've got a grade 2 that actually does something with all the soul, because as you might have noticed, we're generating a lot of soul in Blackwings, but so far we're not really using it. That's where this grade 2 comes into play, as we've got Fleeting Admiration Barrel, and Barrel has the effect Black Wings auto. When this unit is placed in the rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast free. Choose one of your opponent's units for every 2 of your rearguards with even grades, and they get power of -5k until the end of turn. Then, your opponent puts all of their power 0 or less rearguards on the bottom of their deck in any order. So, there are a couple of things that happens here. First off, you can only get a maximum of 2 shots of the -5k, because it counts every 2 of your rearguards. As soon as you can have 5 rearguards, that means you come 1 short for 6, so only 4 will be counted, so you get 2 shots of -5k. With the Blackwing skill of Alestiel, we're already minusing our opponent's units -5k on the front row. So we can use this skill in 2 different ways. We can either put 2 -5k on both rearguards, and in most instances those are going to hit 0 power, thus using this skill to remove 2 rearguards. So Soul Blast free to remove 2 of our opponent's units, which is not that bad. But we can also be a bit more aggressive and give one of the -5k to one of the rearguards and the other -5k to our opponent's Vanguard, because they already got -5k. So in total they're going to go -10k, thus meaning they effectively hit a negative trigger, which is going to hurt them a lot if you start attacking. This card is pretty flexible, can be used in multiple ways, and as soon as we can generate a lot of soul, it's actually fairly decent. Overall, it's going to be a 3-star card, because I wish you could just hit 3 charges of the -5k that you can unload on the entire front row, but that's sadly not the case, so the value There is value, but I don't really think, and I don't really believe it's equal to the free soul blast that we are gonna pay for this. So it's gonna be a free start. That definitely will see play to some extent, but will it be a 4-off? I'm not so sure. Now, of course, as I stated before, we'll also have multi-wing support, and probably one of the best cards that Alestio got access to is this great free Downpouring Singer Alestiel. And Alestiel has a skill, auto rearguard circle. When your Vanguard is placed, cast, bind this card, and draw a card. This skill is kind of awkward because that means you're gonna have 2 cards in your bind zone for every copy that you're gonna resolve of this skill. So at some point you're gonna have multiple of them. But as this is a great free, if you're gonna play White Wings, this doesn't hurt you at all because they're all gonna be even anyways, or at least that's what you're trying to do. So this is fine. But there's actually another aspect of this card, because she has the effect, auto, when this card is bound, both White Wings and Black Wings of your cards are active until the end of your opponent's next turn. So this is the reason why it's called multi-wing support, because if you bind this card, no matter how, you get all the effects. This means you can run potentially a mix between White Wings and Black Wings in your great lineups, but more importantly, you get both effects of your Alestiels. And more importantly, because it doesn't matter how this card is being bound, if this card is bound via Alestiel's ability, be it from the Grade 1, Grade 2 or Grade 3, it will activate. Meaning we get both the effects of the rideline units because both the skills are activated. So if we have the Grade 1, we not only can Soul Blast 1 instead of discarding, we also negate potential rushes. In the Grade 2, we can just Counter Blast 1 to get a critical and our opponent has the guard restrict. And in the likes of the Grade 3, we get 5k power and a critical, and we put our opponent's units minus 5k power, which is basically similar to gaining 10k and the critical, which is actually not that bad. And as soon as we bound this card, next turn, we can immediately get it back to her hand and call her again to the field. So it's an engine that they just keep going, because if you have access to 2 Alestiels, you can have 1 in the field, maybe 1 in hand or 1 in the bind zone, and from that point onwards, every single turn, you can loop them, because 1 goes to the bind and 1 goes to your hand, which then can be called, and the next turn gets bound, the other gets to your hand, and you can keep going and going and going and going as long as you need this engine to be alive. So overall, this card is a solid 5-star card. This is going to be the main inclusion for any of the Alestiel decks, no matter if you're going to focus on pure White Wings or Black Wings, and even if you're going to try for a mix, this card is MVP. There's no questions asked on this part. And then for the final multi-wing support, we surprisingly got a Blitz order in the likes of overcoming it face to face. And face to face has the effect, play this if your Vanguard is Archangel of Twin Wings Alestiel, so no cost, that's important. Choose one of your attacked units, and the chosen unit gets power plus 5k until the end of that battle for each of your rearguards with odd grade. Until the end of turn, when your unit with even grade would be retired from the rearguard circle, guardian circle, you may put that card into your soul instead of the drop. This is actually pretty huge, because this is a mix of working with Black Wings, White Wings, a mix, but probably would be the best in White Wings, because it gets power for every of your odd grades, your uneven grade cards. So in White Wings, you're going to have grade 3s and grade 1s on the board, so this can easily get potentially 10, 15, 20, 25k shield in one card, and as soon as you don't pay a cost, it's similar to just guarding with it. And having a card that is 15 or 25k shield is really good. But on top of that, it works in Black Wings in the sense that all your grade 2s and your triggers are going to go to the soul, which then fuels for the grade 2 that we just talked about at the end that can minus our opponent's units even better. But this also works in White Wings. The reason why it works in White Wings is because, once again, you're going to run triggers. Triggers are even. So if you're going to play this Blitz order, from that point onward, all your triggers that you're going to guard with for the rest of the turn are going to go to your soul, which then fuels a couple of your soul blasting skills, which is not that bad. So overall, this is a Blitz order, a solid 4-star card. This is probably going to be a staple Blitz order in the White Wings deck, and might find its way in the other variants as well. And that also concludes all the support that we're going to cover in this part of the set review, as that is everything that we got for Alestiel as well as for Willista. So the gem archetype itself is kind of underwhelming. This is known throughout the community. Willista does have a very good draw engine. You're going to draw a lot of cards, but the problem is currently is that the deck doesn't really have a payout. There is no win condition available to Willista at this current stage. Hopefully, if we get more support next year, this will change, because the upside to Willista, and we see this in various builds, she's very splashable. So her draw engine can be applied to other decks and other ride lines. So hopefully that will give her more value later down the line once we get more generic good cards. Now, as for Alestiel, it's a very interesting concept. It's a very interesting deck with the white wings and black wings and whole shenanigans where you're just gonna work around your bind zone and trying to manipulate the grades within your bind zone. Overall, the cards are pretty interesting. The deck is actually not that bad. There's a lot of pressure behind it. There's no multi-tag or a lot of value to be had, but it's just good, unadulterated pressure, especially if you're gonna play the white wings because they specialize in crits. But that said, I'm very curious what you guys think of these cards. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of the Willista cards as well as the Alestio cards and what you think of the ratings that I gave these cards. Do you think I was a bit too harsh? Do you think I was a bit too lenient on them? Let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. And don't forget to stick around for part 4 because we still have the 2 main girls to talk about, the 2 main MVPs of the nations that are currently viable in the meta format, as we need to talk about Lorna Roll and Clarissa. But with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/FranklieInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/FranklieInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I've been Mr. Time Leap. See you guys in the next one!